Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, Yomar Elokechem. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, Yomar Elokechem. Give me a harmony.
Welcome to Headlines. This is Aryeh Lebowitz. I am hosting this week in place of David. David's taking the week off. And this week we have a very interesting show. We're going to be speaking about Halachik challenges and Hashkafic challenges in the workplace. There are so many people that have to work in a secular environment in order to put food on the table, in order to support their families, which of course is an obligation and a mitzvah, but it comes with challenges. It comes with many different types of challenges. So we're going to speak to a number of people this week who either have experience in the workplace, in the secular workplace, and have proven to be outstanding in their commitment to Torah mitzvahs, and also to a Rav who deals with a lot of these shaylas to discuss how to handle many of the situations. So our first guest that we're going to speak to this week is going to be Ari Wasserman. He doesn't permit me to call him rabbi, but just suffice it to say, Ari has published many, many svarim, Hagyonei HaParsha, 5 volumes of halachic essays on the Parsha, related to Parshas HaShavua. Beautiful, beautiful sefer. He's published Otzar HaKippa, which is 2 volumes about male head coverings, and just everything you could ever want to know, collection of all the halachic literature and hashkafic literature related to male head coverings. And most recently, he's gotten involved in writing about issues in the workplace. So we're talking to someone who literally wrote the book on halachic issues in the workplace. His sefer is called Making It Work: Surviving and Thriving at Work. Halacha, Musar, Hashkafa, True Stories, published by Feldheim, I believe. Really fantastic work. And from what I understand, he's working on a second volume specifically about women in the workplace. There's so many kollel wives that are charged with being the breadwinners on top of everything else in the families, and so many other women that in order just to make ends meet, that we're facing a reality of 2-income families and women in the workplace, and that's also a very significant issue. Rabbi Wasserman teaches in many yeshivos in Eretz Yisrael, so it's a great pleasure to welcome Ari Wasserman. Welcome, Rabbi Ari. Welcome, Ari, to the program.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Okay. I gave a little bit of background of what you've written, but I would like to just ask you to maybe give a little bit of your own professional background and share some of your expertise, or why we believe you are qualified, as I know you certainly are, to discuss this topic of a frum Jew in the workplace. Maybe a little bit of your work experience as well as your Torah background.
My pleasure. Well, I guess I started working in the secular workplace back in 1995. Actually, that was full-time. Even before that, I had various summer jobs. I started out as an attorney at a fairly large law firm called Sullivan & Cromwell, doing a lot of corporate work, M&A, debt, equity across the board, various transactional deals. And then I moved in 1999 to more on the business side of things in both small and medium-sized companies. And what was fascinating to me, having been at a number of places, law firm and non-law firm, was to see that certain halachic issues and challenges and also opportunities kept coming up regardless of the industry or the size of the company. So back in 1999, I was actually living in Los Angeles. We moved to Israel in 2009. So when I was living in Los Angeles, I started giving a shiur in Halacha on Shabbos that actually many of those topics went on to become the Hegionei Parsha set. And I started dabbling at that time, I guess this is almost 20 years ago, in the sugyas that I saw coming up in the workplace. For example, wearing a kippah at work. That's a common question. Somebody who's going to work, should they wear a kippah, yichud at work, etc.? And then when we moved to Israel in 2009, a couple of yeshivas asked me to give a Choshen Mishpat shir to prepare their students for the workplace, and my response to them was Choshen Mishpat, for the most part, doesn't prepare people for the workplace. There are certain Choshen Mishpat issues that do come up, not stealing, dina and malchusa dina, but many of the common workplace issues that are encountered in the workplace are in the other halakim of Shulchan Aruch as well. So that's when I really started getting into the sugyas, and then teaching at a couple of the yeshivas, and then it went on from there with questions coming in from students and new challenges that they're encountering with the new technology age, and others sending in questions. So it's expanded my horizons dramatically.
Do you still work now in Israel, or are you teaching full time?
I'm mostly writing svarim and teaching at this point.
Wow. So let me ask you a very common one that comes up. I have a lot of Talmidim, Baruch Hashem, and during the summertime, they're working at their first summer internship. And the question that I always get right at the beginning is they take all the interns out to a restaurant. So they want to know, is there a Maris Ha'ayin issue? How should they handle it? Should they go? Should they make a big deal about it and not go? I'm sure this has come up in your professional life. What do you think is the best way to handle going to a non-kosher restaurant?
Well, it's come up once or twice, or actually 10 or 20 times. Yes, it's come up many times. This is a very common issue. The first time it came up for me was when I was summering in Los Angeles at a law firm, and I was invited out to a required lunch at a restaurant called Delmonico's. Delmonico's was a very treif restaurant right across the street from the Young Israel of Century City, probably the most Jewish block outside of New York, and not only was a very treif restaurant feeding lobsters, etc., seafood restaurant, but their entire front of the restaurant was glass that people could see right in who was in there. So this is a very common question. Interestingly, you start off with that. I have a website called workplacehalacha.com that goes through a number of these sugyas, and when I see what people have gone to, this is actually the number one topic that people have gone to on the website. So you're starting with a good one. So in general, Rav Moshe has a related tshuva on this, and he's not very keen on people going into treif restaurants. He says under certain limited conditions he would permit it if there's considerable financial loss, etc., etc. There's no one outside that knows you. If there's anyone outside that knows you, you'd have to go out and inform them that you're going in for a business meeting, not to eat, obviously. But more recently, Rav Asher Weiss here in Yerushalayim put out a tshuva, and he explains that Maris Ayin is something that changes based on time, place, and circumstance. So something that may have been prohibited in the past, once it becomes common knowledge, it is no longer prohibited. So if we think about margarine, when it came out, initially it was prohibited, and now it's common knowledge that it's parv. It wasn't prohibited because of kashrus, but you couldn't have it with meat, and nowadays it's not a problem, or non-dairy cream or parv ice cream. So the same thing Rav Asher Weiss says applies to going into treif restaurants or business meetings.
About Chalaf Shkedim. The Ramada Chalaf Shkedim about.
Yes. Now there's almond milk, there's rice milk, there's soy milk. That's across the board it applies. So Rav Asher Weiss says just like all of those items, once it becomes not common knowledge, when you see somebody frum going into a treif restaurant and he's dressed like a mensch, you know he's going in for business purposes. So he says that nowadays we are lenient when it comes to business purposes.
That's interesting. If it's an absolute treif restaurant, that seems to definitely be the metzius. If you walk in New York and you see, or in Los Angeles, you see a person with a yarmulke going into an absolutely treif restaurant, you would never be choshed that they're eating. It's obvious that they're going in for business purposes. I wonder, and I don't know the answer. Maybe you can tell me, or if you have a restaurant with a very shvacha hashgacha, one that you wouldn't normally trust, would that change things? I know there's certainly certain restaurants around New York that have hashgachas that I would never eat at, and I'm sure many others wouldn't. but may be viewed as fancy restaurants that an employer might take someone to. Do you think that would be different?
That's an excellent question. I asked Rav Asher Weiss that question because here in Yerushalayim, there are restaurants. For example, somebody doesn't eat at a Rabbanut restaurant, they will only eat at Mahadran because they're a Maris Ayin problem going into such a restaurant. So he thought it could be problematic depending on the person and the neighborhood he's from. It could be that we have a Maris Ayin issue, and it turns out then possibly, but not definitively, possibly then we're stricter at a sketchy restaurant than a totally treif restaurant. This question was asked, there's a woman who works in Google in Tel Aviv, and in Google in Tel Aviv they have 3 cafeterias. One is Rabbanut Milchik, one is Rabbanut Fleishik, and one is Treif Gamor. So it's totally Treif. They have swordfish across the board. They have squid and whatever else. The problem that she was encountering is that the Eida Haredis ice cream is in the Treif restaurant, and her question was, can she go in? That was the challenge. So Rav Asher Weiss paskin that indeed, if somebody sees an evidently frum woman or man going into a very treif restaurant, even in Google and in Tel Aviv, he was indeed matir. He did not have a problem with it.
Wow. Just totally parenthetically, not related to the topic, you just reminded me when you were talking about having a window open to the street where everyone can see that you're in the restaurant. I just came across on Tisha B'Av, actually, I have a sefer called Imre Mordechai by Rabbi Mordechai Shapiro from Florida. It was a Talmud of Aaron Kotler and Soravis on Meltzer, and had a connection with a number of great Gedolim, and they published his drashos. And he said a story there that I thought was unbelievable about the Kapishnitzer Rebbe Zatzal in the Lower East Side, walking on Yom Kippur in the Lower East Side with looking like a Malach Hashem, with his white kittel, and he passes by a restaurant and he sees a Jew that was a person that he clearly knew to be Jewish eating in the window of a mamish treif restaurant on Yom Kippur, and he walked into the restaurant, within full garb, walked into the restaurant and said Agud Yantif and B'tei Avon, which is in Yiddish, obviously, which normally la halacha you're not allowed to do that. Someone's doing an Isser to encourage an Isser, and they asked him, how could you say that to him? And he said, look, there's such a thing called the mumar lahachis, and there's such a thing called the mumar l'teyavon. This guy was doing it lahachis. He was trying to rile everybody up and to get HaKadosh Baruch Hu angry. So I wanted to lower his level down from a mumar lahachis to mumar l'teyavon, so his onesh is not as bad. It was just a pure act of ahavas Yisrael. So not a halachic story, but an unbelievable story about
beautiful.
I wanted to ask you another question. Once we're talking about food-related issues, a lot of times you get questions that will come in the holiday season about attending holiday parties, or sometimes after a big deal. I know you're an attorney. I get a lot of questions from attorneys after they close a major real estate deal. The whole group will get together and go out to celebrate, and they'll go out for cocktails or something of that nature. Are there any unique issues related to drinking with goyim, partying with coworkers, and what are the guidelines, if any, if it's allowed?
Well, those are a lot of questions at once, and it really depends on the situation. Is it a holiday party or a cocktail party? I just got an email from a prior student, and I had a follow-up call with him yesterday on this very point, and he had actually 5 scenarios that he was about to get into. The first one was he was having a trivia night being held at a bar, and number 2 was a bike ride after work, which one of his bosses was leading. The third one was Friday socials right in their office. Every Friday they have a l'chaim with beer. This is not a Jewish company. Number 4 is a senior employee was getting married. And then number 5 was they were having an engagement party for him. And at the end of the email, this is before we spoke, he said, I'm going to quote it, I really do not want to attend any of these. And truth be told, I really do not have the time, energy, or headspace these days to allocate any of it to doing social things with these people. So these questions come in all shapes and sizes. And I'd say that to analyze the shaila, you divide it up, I think, in about 5 parts. Number 1, is there anything usher going on at the party? For example, is there kol isha? at a bar? Is it a karaoke bar? I was once at a holiday party, not holiday, employee appreciation party, and a woman got up singing, and it wasn't expected, so I had to exit real quickly. So question number one, are there Issurei going on? Is there Kalisha, dancing? Number two, is it a celebration of a pagan holiday like Xmas? My wife, when she was working in 1997 in downtown Los Angeles, they had a gift swap under the Xmas tree. And there we called Rav Hershel Schachter, who said, no can do, it's a Chukas HaGoyim, so she had to schedule a doctor's appointment at that time, so she wasn't available to go. So number two, is it celebrating a pagan holiday? If it's employee celebration or just a general holiday party, then it's okay, but a Xmas party would not be okay. Number three is drinking. If there's drinking at the party, that doesn't mean we can't go, but drinking with Goyim is highly problematic. Number three is, even if everything is halachically and technically okay, is it the proper environment for us to be participating in? And number five, which is also incredibly important, is how important is it to go? Many times from people have the inclination to say, I'm not going to anything, but that could negatively impact our progression in the company, our relationships with peers, our relationships with bosses. And companies have a real stress nowadays on having a team environment. So not being involved in any activities outside of work is problematic. So I guess that's a lay of the land. And a somewhat of a solution is you have to choose the least of the evils. Yeah, you'd have to participate, depending on the corporate environment. Go to some things, but the things that are problematic, halachically problematic, don't go to. And when you go for a short while, nichnas v'yotzei. And what I used to say is, when I go, I used to work the tables. In other words, when I was there, I wanted everyone who I needed to be seen by to see me. So I'd go around and schmooze with the right people that needed to see me, bosses, etc. And then I would leave, and I actually asked Shaila to Rav Gershon Bess, when living in Los Angeles, about a certain event of the company, and he said, don't get too comfortable, and he went as far to say, don't sit down. It wasn't a halachic statement. Hashkafically, don't sit down, don't get too comfortable. It was important that I went to this event because they were giving out bonus checks, and that was how to get the bonus. So I wanted to go, but didn't want to stick around.
But certainly not to drink any alcohol at any such event.
It's very bad to drink alcohol. Some people want to find a heter based on the Rama, depending on what type of alcohol it is. But the Gra disagrees, the Pri Chadash disagrees. They say all alcohol is problematic when it comes to drinking with non-Jews. And any time at work, it's just not necessary. There is a bit of a pressure to walk around at the events with a cup, with the glass, that it looks like you're drinking alcohol. So put a little bit of water in it, and it can look like look like vodka, whatever it is. So if you need to walk around with orange juice or whatever it is that's in it. It looks like a screwdriver, and it looks like you're drinking, and just walk around and walk the walk, and people will think you're participating with them.
Wow, that's an interesting answer. Moving on to another very common one that I get from, again, Talmidim all the time. I'm zocheh to be able to teach Beis Medrash age, college age boys in Lander College, and when they're finishing up college, they're going on interviews, and their first bit of anxiety on an interview is when a woman interviews them and sticks out their hand to shake their hand, and they want to know how to handle that. Are they supposed to shake a woman's hand? Should they? Is there a way to shake the hand, or should they beg off and say, I heard that the Stipler holds is Yaharg Val Yavar, so I'd rather you kill me than shake your hand. What's the best way to handle that?
This comes up all the time. There are some pretty famous stories in this regard. There's Rav Avadia Yosef, when he was receiving the Israel Prize from the then Prime Minister Golda Meir. She stuck out her hand, and he did not reciprocate. And it was in front of all the television cameras, and he got flack from it and got criticized for it. How can you not respond and leave Golda Meir's hand hanging there? It's a disgrace to her. And he said the Torah is more important. So that was one of the famous stories. And Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, when he went to meet the Queen of England, she, as protocol at the end of the meeting, extended her hand. He did not flinch. He did not reciprocate. And interestingly, so the story goes, later in the day, he got an apology letter from the protocol office in England saying it's the protocol that the Queen does not shake hands with an Orthodox rabbi, and she was not informed of it in advance, so we apologize to you. So there are a number of other famous stories in that regard. The key issue here is the sheet of the Rambam, which has been embraced Halacha by the Shach, by the Nobit of Yehuda, but Rav Moshe Feinstein, that if a touching is not derech taiva, we commonly refer to it as derech chiba, if it's not an amorous touching, according to most shitas in the Rambam, it's mutter. In other words, if it's amorous, if it's derech chiba, it's an issur d'oraisa, l'sikru v'legala v'serva. But if it's not amorous, according to the Shach explaining the Rambam, it is mutter, the touching. So we would think to say when people are shanking in the secular workplace, it should be mutter as long as the mind of the Orthodox Jew, be it a man or a woman, the halachas are going to be the same, is a clean. It's not an amorous touching. Nonetheless, Rav Moshe Feinstein has three very short tshuvas on this issue, and he's machmir. He says we do paskin like the Shach, we do paskin like the Rambam, but nonetheless, Rav Moshe says I am concerned that it will very quickly go to derech chiba. So who is able to control that? The line is very blurred when it goes from non-derech chiba, non-amorous to amorous. So Rav Moshe says it would be prohibited. It's the Chazon Ish says ye'areg val yavor. It's vizra de'avodah zarah. You can't absolutely the Giela Gellis. You absolutely cannot shake the hand according to the Chazon Ish. But there is a minority view of some poskim that are indeed lenient on this. So there's a Rav Shlomo Carlebach, not the singer. Rav Shlomo Carlebach, he passed away in 1919. He was a prominent Rav in Germany, and he says that there's nothing more humiliating to somebody to refuse to reciprocate a handshake. So he says, I used to be makbid about it, but people were shaking my hand, and it got too difficult, so I just ensure his head is, it's not derech chiba. And Rav Chaim Berlin was asked by a student who was going out to the secular workplace, and what do I do? That's the common greeting. And Rav Chaim Berlin said, try to avoid it. But if she already extended it, then it would be mutter as long as your intentions are innocent and darachei noam. We shouldn't embarrass people, and we don't want people to think we're meshugayim. He brings a different rationale. So the minority view is to be lenient as long as the other party initiated the handshake. We would not be able to initiate, but it's all assuming that it is not derech chiba. That's a very important point. Now, what happens lemaisa if you there are many people nowadays that are makbid to not extend. Rav Asher Weiss says in Eretz Yisrael, even if somebody extends the hand, we would not reciprocate. A woman told me a couple of stories that she had. That one interview she went on, it lasted exactly 30 seconds. The man interviewing her, we'll call him John Smith, John extends his hand, and she says, sorry, I cannot reciprocate. And his statement was, well, I'm sorry you came out today because the position has been filled. Have a nice day. So, wow. So that was one of the stories. But then she brought a contrasting story that she went on an interview, and she told the man, I'm sorry, I don't shake hands. He said, not a problem. And he went on to the next person who was interviewing her and said, make sure not to shake her hand. She's strict about that because of Jewish reasons. And she was hired for that job. She stood for 9 years. And her boss, and she didn't know about this, when they would go to meetings, he would call ahead and tell the clients, be sure not to shake her hand because it's against her religion. She never found out till into the job, a number of years into the job. One of the clients actually gave her a confidential call and said, I just want to find out why you don't shake hands because your boss told me you don't shake hands. And that's how she found out that her boss called ahead all the time to warn people, don't shake her hand, it's against her religion. Wow. So that's quite an amazing story.
Yeah,
I'll
tell you, I had Mori V'Rabbi Rav Hershel Schachter is one of the Mekilim on this issue. Like you said, if the other person extends their hand first, and Mori V'Rabbi Rav Mordechai Willig is also Mekil, but to do a brisk, firm handshake, not to do a soft handshake, but to do a quick, brisk handshake, so that it should not be viewed as derech taiva in any way. But Rav Schachter tells a story all the time. I'll tell you the follow-up to this. He tells a story about Rav Shimon Shkap. That Rav Shimon Shkap had a granddaughter who had a friend who wasn't religious. I don't know all of the details of Rav Shimon's family. I think it was somewhat complicated. And the granddaughter's friend came to Rav Shimon's house, and she didn't know anything, and she stuck her hand out to Rav Shimon, nice to meet you, Rabbi, and that Rav Shimon shook her hand. That was the story that Rav Schachter said, and that afterwards Rav Shimon said, to his granddaughter, she doesn't know how inappropriate it is to stick out your hand to a rabbi, but I know how inappropriate it is to embarrass somebody. So that's why I shook her hand. So I mentioned that story once, and Rav Kalman Epstein, who's an Einikel of Rav Shimon, called me up, and he was very upset about that story. He said, we have no real reliable person who ever said that story. It was the granddaughter who wasn't so religious and had an agenda. Then he was very upset by that story that it was told over. I told him he could take it up with Rav Shechter if he wants, because I was just repeating what Rav Shechter said. And then someone came over to me and told me they heard from Rav Zelig Epstein many times. He used to tell that story. So I don't know. I'm not sure what to do with it. But clearly this is a major issue in Poskim. And, like you said, the Chazon Ish and the Stipler and so many others hold it Yaharig Val Yavar. But there are Mekilim. I find it fascinating that Moshe in the Tshuvas is machmir about this, and he's the one with the famous subways and buses tshuva that you referred to before, about how he really paskins that if it's not b'derech taiva, it's technically mutter. But I guess he was concerned that this would lead to derech taiva. And just one more ha'ara. I know I'm supposed to be interviewing you, but one more ha'ara. Someone emailed me just last week and said, be careful with this psak if you tell people that they can shake hands, because if you do it once, then you're going to be expected to do it every time. So it's going to become a consistent thing. Like the story you told with this woman whose boss would call ahead, that really, the fact that she refused that first time saved her from all of these other times where she would have otherwise had to have shaken someone's hand.
Yeah, she laid down the line at the beginning, and that it's not only shaking of hands. Some of the bigger issues that we have coming up in the workplace are the hugging and the peck on the cheek and the patting on the back and the high five. So shaking hands is a very common one, but the hugging and all the other touching is really very relevant also.
Right, and I can't imagine there will be anyone that's making on hugging. I mean, a high five maybe is like a handshake, but even though it's less professional, it's much more informal, so it may be much worse. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, the high five I asked Rabbi Yitzchak Breitowitz about, and he said that it is derech chiba. That's a sign of we're in this together, we're a team together. So he was very machmir on the high fiving. When it comes to the hugging issue, the question is, it happens, and what do you do? Do you have to throw the guy off or throw the woman off, or do you keep passive, karka olam? What exactly do you do in that situation? So it's a very difficult problem. So I asked this question also to Rav Asher Weiss, and he was of the view to be passive. Don't scream, don't shout, relax. And if you think it's a repeat offender, then you indeed should go quietly and mention, please don't do that again. But not to make a tremendous scene on the spot there.
Yeah, Mistama with the whole Me Too movement and everything that's going on in America now, one would understand not wanting to cross certain boundaries, even from a purely secular perspective. I would assume. I don't know. Let's move on to a different topic in the workplace. You're working a long day, especially as an attorney, and especially in the wintertime. You're working well past Shkia and well past Tzeitzah Kochavim, and you have to daven mincha at some point. So is one permitted, allowed, obligated to take off time in the middle of the workday in order to daven mincha? Do you have to explain that to your boss that I'm going to take 15 minutes? What if there's a minyan 2 blocks away and it takes another couple of minutes to walk there, another couple of minutes to walk back? How does one handle davening on the boss's dime?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, this is actually a broader issue than just minyan. We can expand it to answering personal phone calls from the kids and checking your personal email. So when it comes to this question, we first have to analyze, because different people fall into different buckets as to what their financial relationship is with their employer. For example, if we have somebody that's hired as a consultant and he's paid for a deliverable, meaning he's not selling his time as an employee, that's not a problem. He just has to deliver something and he gets paid for that. And even somebody who has unlimited hours, like an attorney, you don't work 9 to 5 typically, or an investment bank or an accountant, you show up and you stay until your work is done. there again, the employer has an understanding that he has to give you a little bit more flexibility because you're working so hard that he's going to give you a little bit more time when you need to do errands, run things during the day. So we're really discussing somebody who has set hours, who wants a little extra time to daven, meaning ideally you go during the break, and we have a question davening and saying Shemona Esrei and also going out to Minyan. So somebody who has set hours, can he take that on the cheshbon, on the dime of the employer? So the default is there's a Gemara about Abba Chilkiah, who was the grandson of Choni HaMa'agel. Choni HaMa'agel was very well known that when he davened, his tefillas were answered. So his grandson, Abba Chilkiah, had the same power. So there was one time that there was a drought, and Chazal came and said, would you mind davening? He was actually on the job, working in the field, and he didn't even turn around to say Shalom Aleichem to them. And they asked him later that night, why were you so unfriendly? And he said, I was on the clock. I was a schir yom, and I couldn't be mevatel. I couldn't spend any of the time that I was paid for speaking with you. So that's a general concept of how important it is that we respect the time that we have effectively sold. That was the Mesilas Yesharim's words, that we sold our time to the employer. And there's also a Gemara in Brachos that says that an employee paid for his time, he can't even say the full Shemona Esrei. He can only say Havinenu, which is the short version of the 13 bakashos in the middle of Shemona Esrei. So, indeed, nowadays there are some bosses who are very strict about this. Somebody told me a story. He went out to Mincha, investment banker working in Chicago, and he saw at the end of Mincha his boss was calling, and his boss said, where are you? And he said, I went out to prayers. And the boss's response was, get back here and pray a different time. So
right.
We do have employers that are strict. I have a friend who was a senior executive at a Fortune 50 company, and his boss was so strict about their time that he put an app on his smartphone to see when Shabbos would start to make sure that his senior employee did not leave even a minute early. So
is this something to bring up on an interview, or will that just cost you your job?
So it's another question. So that's a question of Geneva Stas. So we typically say, depending on what the shaila is, if it's a very important issue that we have to disclose, it should be brought up later in the process. But mincha, for the most part, wouldn't be something that to disclose. Why? Because the Shulchan Aruch, in the end of the day, paskins that nowadays things have changed. It's very interesting. The Halacha tracks employment practices. And at the time of the Gemara, the employees were strict. You couldn't even say a full Shemona Esrei, but the Shulchan Aruch says nowadays, this is written about 500 years ago, Ein derech lahakpik b'kach. Employers are not strict about this, and the employers hire based on the understanding that people will say a full Shemona Esrei. And the Magen Avram goes even further, and he says that also there's an understanding nowadays that people will even make minyan, and that's also acceptable. So I think the general consensus is, unless you have a boss that's very strict, or if you have an industry standard that doesn't permit it, there's an understanding that people can go out. It has to be at a reasonable amount of time. I was working at a point in Pasadena, and Pasadena was a good 35 minutes from the nearest mincha. So during the winter months, there was no way to go 35 minutes one way, 35 minutes back, and also daven mincha. That's unreasonable, and it's also outside of the 18-minute requirement to make mincha. So I think we would say the default would be that it's permitted unless you know there's an industry standard against you going out for that amount of time, unless your boss is makbid. Then we would be permitted to go out for a reasonable amount of time. And the Aguda in New York has the mincha maps that you can find the mincha nusach Ashkenaz, nusach Sfard. You want to daven in a stairwell, you want to daven in a fancy office, you can choose it, and you'll have your option within a couple blocks in New York.
My uncle, if I'm not mistaken, my uncle was a partner at a major law firm in New York, and he had a mincha minyan in his office, and it became like not only an accepted thing. The firm, which when he was hired he was the first frum person hired in the firm back in the 1950s. But they designated space for it. They not only allowed for it, but they designated space for the mincha minyan once he retired and downsized his office. So I guess, like you said, I guess it really depends on the circumstance. But very often it's not something that's really discouraged. I want to move instead to a hashkafic issue relating to the workplace. we're taught a lot about being an Ohr Lagoyim, making a Kiddush Hashem, representing all that is good and just and right in the world. To what extent do we bring that into the office in a proactive way? Meaning, certainly, we'd always want to behave in a way where a Jew shouldn't be cursing in the office, shouldn't be using foul language, shouldn't be saying negative things, and should represent a certain sense of morality. But what about saying something when you hear someone making a racist comment, or or something that's being done that's immoral or inappropriate? To what extent is it a frum person's obligation to stand up and say this just isn't right, or to what extent do you just sort of lay low and not make too much of a fuss?
Well, yeah, I guess I would divide up between if you hear a racist comment, or if the company is stealing from investors, if they're selling a dangerous product that we may have to go public about. So it really will depend on the situation. When it comes to the racist comment, if somebody's making racist comments, should you stand up and say that's inappropriate, it's incorrect? I think it really depends on the situation. For example, who made the comment? Is it your boss who's going to get irritated at you, fire you because you're speaking up against him? You have to think twice about it. And in addition, will speaking up accomplish anything or maybe make things worse? So I think you have to tread lightly. But the most important thing when it comes to, for example, hearing racist comments is that you don't participate. We can't be speaking like that. And I want to draw on a Chafetz Chaim in the Sefer when he's talking about Lashon Hara, and this relates very much to hearing Lashon Hara in the workplace, and we'll pull on a specific part of what the Chafetz Chaim says to answer this question. The Chafetz Chaim says that if somebody is stuck in a meeting, for example, and he can't get out, can't slip away, so what should he do? And they're talking Lashon Hara. So he gives various conditions that you can stay and don't believe the Lashon Hara and don't get comfortable there. And one thing he says is when you're sitting there, don't smile. Don't make it look like you're having pleasure from what you're hearing when you're hearing the Lashon Hara. And in fact, he says you should have a facial expression of displeasure. And I think I would say the same thing when it comes to racist comments. You have to think about what are the repercussions and is it going to hurt me. But at a minimum, don't participate and don't have pleasure, and even have a sign of displeasure on your face when hearing things like that. And the most important thing is that we make a Kiddush Hashem through how we act in the workplace. But it doesn't mean we should be going around and giving mussar to people, because there's a Ramah that talks about, and this gets into the whistleblowing context, that if it's going to negatively impact me financially, I don't have to blow the whistle. I have to make sure that I'm not involved in any of the activities, but it doesn't mean that I have to be an Ohr Lagoyim in every instance.
Right. I wanted to also raise an issue, hashkafic issue, but it's probably halachic also. It comes up all the time. Very often people find that working with non-Jews is not as challenging as working with Jews who are not Shomrei Torah or mitzvos. And there are certain things that will come up. I've been asked many times, and I wonder if you've discussed with Gedolei HaPoskim, or if you have your own thoughts on a Jewish boss who gets engaged to a non-Jewish person, or a same-gender person, or a non-Jewish boss who gets engaged to a Jewish person, and everyone's saying congratulations and mazel tov and buying gifts and attending the wedding. How does a frum Jew handle seeing what is really the greatest Jewish tragedy, intermarriage? Really something that we can't tolerate, we can't stomach. It's and here's someone that you're close with and that you interact with on a daily basis. Can you say mazel tov? Should you say mazel tov? Should you stay away? How does one handle something like that?
They're doing an aveira and a terrible aveira, so we can't say mazel tov. We can't buy them a gift because they're doing an aveira. We can't give them positive recognition. We can't give them encouragement for an aveira. It's a problem of chanufa. So we would not be able to say Mazel Tov. We wouldn't attend the wedding either. This comes up very much in the Bali Tshuva yeshivas when somebody has a sibling that's getting intermarried, and then the shaila is, I have to go to the wedding. It's my brother that's getting married. He wants me to be the best man at the wedding, and my parents are insisting that I come. We just had an incident in Ohr Sameach recently. Somebody asked the shaila to Rav Yitzchak Breidowitz, and the response was, you can't go to the chuppah, if there's such a thing, to the ceremony, but afterwards, in that context, because of the family issues, there may be a tzad to be makel, but otherwise, in the work context, we would say it would not be permitted.
What's the tzad by the family issues? To keep the family member close, to keep a relationship?
Yeah, kibud avahem and this and that. I didn't ask the shaila directly, but that's what the person who asked the shaila, who was the brother who was under severe family pressure, he was told that to go to, not during the ceremony, but afterward would just because of that family pressure. But we wouldn't, any heter that may exist, which is controversial, it would not exist in the workplace situation.
Yeah, Mari Varabi Rav Schechter often points out that you look at the divorce rate in the United States, and it's through the roof. And certainly people who come from such different backgrounds, that they're from totally different religions, you'd imagine there's a very high chance of divorce. So maybe based on that, it's worthwhile to keep a relationship with the Jewish relative, even though you can't say Mazel Tov or anything like that, but to keep a relationship with the Jewish relative so that when they do get divorced, which is more likely than not, they'll feel that they have a Jewish family to come back to. Maybe that's
right. When it comes to going to a non-Jewish wedding, I mean, that's a Gemara in Avodah Zarah that says eating at a non-Jewish wedding is like eating the sacrifices of the idols. It's like eating tikrovis Avodah Zarah, and that's how we paskin in Shulchan Aruch, that to go and eat at a non-Jewish wedding is indeed highly problematic, according to some poskim of D'oraisa. So going, strictly speaking, wouldn't be terrible, although Mishnah Halacha says that one shouldn't go either. It's not the best thing to do. But that comes up also if non-Jews are getting married, and that happens oftentimes in the workplace, that you get an invitation to a non-Jewish wedding.
Yeah. I had a shaila once. A fellow in my shul works in a big New York law firm, and his boss said to him at lunchtime, he was going down to buy some lunch, and his boss said, "Oh, do me a favor, stop by the cafeteria and pick me," which was a non-kosher cafeteria, "pick me up a tuna fish sandwich. I'm not going to have time to go out today." So he's just asking a very cordial favor. The problem is his boss was a Jew, and he asked him to go to a non-kosher cafeteria to pick something up. I had another case where the boss said, "Can you do me a favor, pick me up some sushi?" And he said, "Get me crab, and if they don't have crab, then salmon." And they had crab, but he didn't know maybe he should get the salmon anyway because he doesn't want to feed non-kosher food to a Jew. Have you ever had that kind of situation come up, or have any thoughts on that kind of situation?
Yeah, that hasn't happened to me, but that shaila happens if you have a Jewish secretary that's working and a partner or somebody senior says, "Can you go order me lunch?" I have a friend who was working as a first-year attorney at a large firm, and they was at a company party, and a partner he was speaking with says, blank, we'll call him Harry, "Harry, do you mind holding my plate for me?" It was full of shrimp. It was a Jewish partner, not observant. "Can you hold my plate for me? I want to go to the bathroom." And Harry says, "I really can't do that for you." "Why not?" "Well, it's not kosher." And the guy says, "But I'm not asking you to eat it. Just hold it for me." Now, indeed, this is a question of lifnei iver, ordering somebody food that's not kosher, somebody who's Jewish. And we have that question also come up if you have clients come and he's not wearing a yarmulke, but he's Jewish. Is he going to say a bracha on the food that you're giving him? He's not wearing a yarmulke, so maybe he's going to say a bracha. I actually just came to my mind, we had a Bezek guy coming to fix our phone in Israel. And it was a very hot day, so we offered him something to drink, but he wasn't wearing a yarmulke. So I said, "Would you mind, saying a bracha?" I started, I was going to hand him a yarmulke. He takes his smartphone out of his pocket and he puts it on his head and says, "Shahakol niya bidvara." So these shilas come up, these lifnei iver shilas. No, lamaisa, lifnei iver on a doraisa level applies if you're the only source of the prohibited activity. In other words, if you're the only source for tray food in your question, then it would be an Isser doraisa, but he could get tray food independently of you. So it's no longer on a level of a doraisa. It's no longer of an Isser doraisa, but it'd be a question of an Isser derabanan. So when it comes to the derabanan level, derabanan would be an Isser misayeya. Misayeya, there are various heterim. One is the person, the Shach says, if the person is a mumer, the person, he willfully threw off Torah, for example, or is mechal Shabbos for farhesia, lahachis, whatever the definition of a mumer is, then the Shach would say that the misayeya doesn't apply. It would be mutter. And there are other heterim. The Binyan Tzion and the Ksav Sofer says that the Isser is only on a Messiah level if you are assisting at the same time as he's doing the Aveira. But here, because you're buying the food as the assistance, it's in advance of his eating it, then there's another svara that the Messiah would not apply. So we have, technically speaking, it's probably okay, but still probably not the best thing to do.
Yeah, I'll just add 2 points. I once had the opportunity to see Rabbi Yisrael Reisman at a bris, and I was asking him some shailas, these kinds of questions, and when he quoted that shach about Messiah relating to someone who's not a Shomer Torah mitzvos, that there's no Isser Messiah when someone is not a Shomer Torah mitzvos, he said, for a shul rabbi, that's one of the most important makomos to know. I think he said there are 2 makomos that are more important than anything else for a shul rabbi in America to know. One was that shach, and I forgot what the other one was, so I know half of them. But that shach, he said, is very, very critical, and I do find it's 100% true. It comes up all the time. And just, it's a very interesting point you raised about giving someone to eat when they're not going to say a bracha, because it's beferish in Shulchan Aruch that you're not allowed to give someone to eat when they're not going to say a bracha. But what's not beferish in Shulchan Aruch is the problem if they do say a bracha and they're not wearing a yarmulke. That's a very interesting point that you raise. In Yalkut Yosef, when the current Rishon LeZion talks about his father, he said that his father, Avadia, Zichrono Livracha, would always request of the person to say a bracha. And that was easy. If they were going to Avadia, they were wearing a yarmulke. And also when you're Avadia, you can get away with making that request. It probably wouldn't go over as well when you're asking the senior partner, to recite a bracha. Yeah, to on yarmulke and recite a bracha probably wouldn't go over as well. Okay, I just want to ask one final question. I'm sure we can go on like this forever, and I'm enjoying this so much. You have so many wonderful anecdotes, as well as obviously your knowledge of the halachos, the relevant halachos and poskim is tremendous. But just maybe a broader question, whether if there's like sort of any parting examples you want to give, interesting questions that came up, show the kind of variety of issues that can arise in the workplace that maybe we haven't touched on.
They're very broad. When it comes to the workplace, the shilas can come from anywhere. It can come from every chelik and Shulchan Aruch, and it can come from Hashkafa. So, to think of some of the shilas that I've either encountered or have been sent my way. I remember once a Rav called me from Los Angeles. He had a mispalel who was an attorney, and he was involved in a very nasty deposition. And the attorney's question was, should he take his kippah off, because he expected that his actions, how he would be running the deposition, would be viewed as a chilul Hashem. So that was an interesting question. Can you take off a yarmulke for a chilul Hashem? I had somebody asked the following shaila. His lawyer went. I was once
at a question-and-answer session with Rav Mordechai Willig, and with a bunch of undergraduate students in a business school. And one of the students said, "If you know that you get very frustrated and you curse, should you not wear your yarmulke in the workplace?" So Rav Willig said, "No, you should not curse. You should wear a yarmulke, and that will save to you, not to act like a chaya."
Right. My brother had that shaila. He's a professor in business school, and students often come to him and say, "Should I wear my yarmulke?" Because they think that it will negatively impact their networking abilities, because one big part of going to business schools is to network with others. So he typically says, if you're going to make a Kiddush Hashem, wear it, but if not, you have to think about it. Everyone used to wear the yarmulkes except one student did not wear the yarmulke. And it turned out that Baruch Hashem, he didn't wear the yarmulke because he was a walking Chilul Hashem, cursing, and his midas were terrible. But we had an email interchange about this, and he said, he advised him, if you're going to be a Chilul Hashem, don't wear it. And I said, but Ramosha has a couple tshuvas that if you're going to do an Aveira, then you should still wear the yarmulke. And he talks about somebody who's going to go mix dancing. Ramosha says, why do two Aveiras? Somebody who's going to go into an inappropriate theater and see a movie that he shouldn't be seeing. Why do two Aveiras? And then I asked a number of Gedolim, was my brother right or was I right? I'm saying wear the yarmulke, and my brother's saying if you're going to create a Chilul Hashem, take the yarmulke off. And indeed, they were of the view that Rav Moshe was talking about leave the yarmulke on when you're doing an activity that is societally accepted as your people view you, mix dancing, etc. You're not creating a Chilul Hashem vis-a-vis society. That's why Rav Moshe says leave the yarmulke on, but vis-a-vis somebody who's a Vilda Chai in business school, they were of the view that even Rav Moshe would say take the yarmulke off. So that was
my uncle.
Shaila.
Story wrong, and I'm sure he'll correct me someone will tell him, and he'll correct me if I'm getting the story wrong. My uncle Julius Berman was a partner at K. Scholler for many years, and when he got the job, I referred to him before. I'm pretty sure the story went that he was the first frum person to get a job in K. Scholler, even though it was all Jewish, but he was the first religious person. And Rav Soloveitchik told him not to wear a yarmulke at work at that time because it was just too provocative in the culture in the 1950s in white collar workplace. And he only started wearing his yarmulke when he brought in the Reichman account, which happened through a relationship through Rav Moshe Feinstein, actually, that he was able to bring in business from Reichman. That was that's I believe the story in our family. But it's a tricky question.
Interesting. So some other questions that have come across, the iPad that the employer forgot to ask for it when somebody left his job, is there a mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda? Does it have to be returned? Or I had the following scenario, a woman that I worked with for a number of years, her sister passed away and the funeral was in a church. And it would look very bad to her and everyone else if you don't attend. Can you go in? The answer was no, you can't go in, but go stand outside, give your best wishes, and then depart. Another shaila that I had was we used to order when I worked in downtown New York in Manhattan, 125 Broad Street. We used to order from a midtown Fleischich restaurant, and it used to come 30 to 40 minutes. The food, one time it came 2 hours late, and it didn't have the seals on it. Can you eat that or not? That's
I get
question
that
comes up.
Sometimes the people in the workplace, when it comes with the seals, want to present it nicely, so they'll just open it up. I've gotten that a lot, that the company went out of their way to order me kosher food, and now it has no seals in it. But I know it's for sure from that place. What am I allowed to do in that situation? I've told them, maybe you'll tell me if I'm wrong about this. I've told them, take a picture with your phone, send it to the mashgiach in the restaurant, and say, Hakerna, is this the food that you sent? Because the chashash of Nesalim and Ayin is not that they're going to put a non-kosher ingredient in, but that they're going to switch it out. And if you have it via Ayin, I thought that would be mutter in that case. You agree?
Nowadays I would agree with that. Nowadays it's via sign. I once had the shaila because this was what back before we had the phones that you could take pictures and send it in to people. So when I had the shaila, it was the same thing I ordered every night. It was steamed chicken and broccoli or vegetables. Same thing. So is that considered a tefillah sign that I recognize this because it's the same every time, or do you actually have to recognize the dish that they sent to you, and I don't have a tefillah sign in it because this is like last night, but I didn't see when they sent it from the restaurant. So this was somewhat of a complicated shaila, this one.
Yeah.
Other shaila, somebody just asked me yesterday, the woman in the next cubicle has very scantily clothing on. What should he do? That's a very difficult shaila, but that's at every workplace, every secular workplace has that issue. You have questions of emailing Jews or non-Jews right after Shabbos, and if you're in a different time zone, as it's a Leaf Neiver Shaila. And just one last one that comes to mind, if the employee manual says that the company owns any gifts you receive, and you receive a $15 Amazon gift card, does that mean you have to turn it over to the company?
Right. Wow. Okay. I guess you're giving us a taste of just how broad this topic is, and I guess people will have to buy your book, right? Most of these topics are covered in your sefer, which is a beautiful, beautiful sefer, making it work. So I want to thank you very much for taking so much of your time and enlightening us on so many of these very fascinating topics. You're walking Kiddush Hashem, Ashrecha. You should continue to be Matzliach in your Harbatzas HaTorah, Bein B'chsav, Bein Bal Peh, and of course my warmest regards to your wonderful, wonderful family.
Okay, thank you so much. It's a pleasure speaking with you.
Take care. Bye-bye. All right, we have with us, joining us now, Rav Yosef Kushner, who's the Rav. He's an author of several Svarim, Commerce and Issurei Hanaah, Commerce and Shabbos. He's known to be an expert in Choshen Mishpat, business-related issues. So he's here to provide us a Rav's perspective on the halachos that relate to issues that come up in the workplace. Welcome, Rav Kushner.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate this. Big schus to be on again.
Great pleasure. Thank you. I wanted to start by asking about probably the most common thing that comes up for people in the secular workplace. And I know my Talmidim, when they first go on interviews, it makes them very nervous because they know there's going to be a woman who likely will interview them and will stick a hand to shake a hand. And they're not sure how to handle that situation. So if you have any comments on what the Halacha says, hashkafically, how a Ben Torah should view those situations, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Okay, so we're starting by throwing me straight into the fire. So there's a few aspects to this question, but we'll start with the halacha because I think we have to premise that the conversation with the halacha, and then we'll get into a little of a broader discussion about this. Halacha, there's really a wide there's a wide spectrum of halacha. That's the truth. L'mashal, in Washington Heights, Rav Breuer held it's lechatchila for in the business setting. We're not talking about of course derech chiba. It's just it's a business way of just saying hello to somebody. He felt it was lechatchila. It's Yidua, the Stipler writes that in his opinion, shaking a woman's hand in a business setting is a higher gval yaver. Most people, and obviously, if someone's in a community where his rav feels it's lechatchila, that's obviously that's beyond this discussion. That's his rav and that's his messiah in his community. That's something he could rely on. But most rabbanim, most poskim feel it's either something that should be really avoided or it's forbidden, absolutely forbidden. That is the opinion of most poskim. And in general, most people try to avoid it. That's the truth. Now, that's really the halachic perspective. Without going into any deeper, the actual minutiae of the halacha, most rabbanim feel it's something that should not be done. Now, what happens is people, and I get calls about this, people are aware that's not something that they don't want to do it. It's not something that they feel comfortable doing from a halachic standpoint, but they feel it's just not going to be received properly, especially like you said, they're in an interview, they don't want to get off on the right foot, and they don't feel it's proper. And they don't feel like it's proper to just they almost feel like they're socially snubbing someone if they're not going to shake their hand. So I wanted to say as follows.
We had on Ari Wasserman, who used to be a lawyer. He told us that he spoke to one woman who refused to shake hands at an interview, and ultimately she got a great job and a boss who was very understanding. But one of the interviews she went on, the interview was over. She wouldn't shake the hand, and that was it. The whole thing was over.
Wow. So I want to tell you a story. I'll make it really quick. I want to tell you a story. I have a friend of mine, because I really think it brings out a very important point. I have a friend of mine from Yeshiva, and he's really a good guy, a starker guy in Yiddishkeit, and he's really a mensch. He's a very proper guy. He's from out of town. And he carries himself properly, ben adam l'chaver, and he's an accountant in Manhattan. He called me up, and he told me, he said, I want to tell you the truth. He said, this is ruining my career. He said, when I know that I do not want to shake women's hands, because I don't think it's the proper thing. Halacha, from the research that I've done, it's not something I should be doing. But when it comes Lamaisa and I have to shake someone's hand, he said, it is so awkward. It's beyond awkward. It's bizarre that I don't shake their hand. And they're just not exposed to why am I not shaking their hand? And he told me, it's like if I have an interview that day, my whole day I'm just fixated on it. What am I going to do? What's going to happen? He's like, I can't. I'm becoming obsessed with it, and I'm literally going to have to leave this profession, which sounds extreme, but this is what he tells me. He's like, could you call your father? Well, my father-in-law his name is Shlomo Miller. He's a Rav in Toronto. He's like, could you speak to him for me? Get me a heter, please. And so I told him, I said, maybe there are people who give you a heter, but I don't think my father-in-law is the right address for this. He's like, can you please call him and get me an eitzah, right? So I called my father-in-law, and he said the premise of the question is all wrong, and he was explaining to me, and I really agree with what he was saying. He was saying as follows: he's saying a person has to come across, he has to internally feel that he's proud to be part of Am Yisrael, and he's different, and we're part of a Heilige nation, we're holy, and we're set aside for that. We're Am Kadosh. A person first has to internalize this. He has to come across, he has to be proud. My father kept on saying, it has to be a source of pride. You can't be embarrassed about it. Because when you're embarrassed, you come across very hesitantly. Because internally you're very hesitant about it. Because you do not feel comfortable with it. And he was saying a person has to be comfortable with it because there's nothing not to be comfortable about. We're holy, we are Am Nivcher, we are the chosen nation. Now, I'm not saying you should look down on people. I'm not saying that you should start lecturing people why you don't shake your hand. And we'll get to maybe what you should do practically. But just from an internal standpoint, sometimes a person has to internalize that this is a good thing, that we do not shake hands with the other gender because Chazal felt this is important for us. We have shmiras, and even if it's not, even if maybe there's someone who would be matter, but it's for sure better not to. We have a shmira because we are holy and we're different. And it's not something that a person should be uncomfortable with. It's just the opposite. A person has to be proud. And when a person's proud and when a person is confident, it really comes across much more smooth and much more natural, which brings me to my next point. And that is, and this is what I think. I think a person constantly finds himself in such a situation. I know it sounds funny, but you really have to prepare, which means if you don't prepare this conversation starts because a hand is thrust out towards you, almost, 9 out of 10 times you're just going to shake that hand. And then later you're going to feel guilty, and then you prepare, literally in a mirror. You shake your hand out to yourself, and you literally prepare what you're going to say. And every person has to prepare something where they'll be comfortable. And it's something to the lines of, and you could say, I'm an Orthodox Jew, and we don't touch other, we do not touch the hands of other females, only my wife. Something like that, to the point where people can respect it, but it has to come off that you believe it, and you're confident, and you're proud of it. And I think that's something that would make it easier for people. And they shouldn't feel that this is a question between halacha. I'm sorry, yeah, what?
Such a chashva ha'ara in life itself that, about any situation. I say with a lot of my talmidim that are in medical school, for example, that I always tell them it's all about knowing in advance what the challenges are going to be so that you can visualize it. A lot of times, to pick a crazy example that has nothing to do with this, a medical student is going to be on rounds and they're doing they're doing a vasectomy or something, and they'll ask the resident or whatever who wants to do snipping, and if you don't know in advance that's an Issa D'Oraisa, and you're going to be put on the spot, and you're going to be told, chashiva, you're honored with this. But if you prepare in advance, you visualize, it helps with so many different things.
Right. Even if you do know there's a problem, but if you didn't work it out internally, what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, you come across very hesitant, and then it becomes very awkward. It really does. And then you feel bad after. Well, how did you do it? And then you feel maybe you compromised. But if it comes off natural, the guy prepares in the mirror. He shakes out a hand, and he prepares himself exactly, and it has to be in his voice. That's why it's not, you shouldn't, and I shouldn't, and nobody should prepare a nusach, an exact girsa of what he should say. It has to come from him, and how he feels comfortable communicating the fact that we do not shake hands. And if you do it, I believe it today, especially in today's world, we live in such a progressive society and everyone's so accepting. I think most of the time it shouldn't be a big deal. But when you make it a big deal, almost like you want to shake your hand, but you're kind of not allowed to shake your hand, it becomes very, very odd. And then you feel odd, and then it feels bizarre, and that's not a good feeling.
We had on a woman who went to optometry school, and she was describing how she was going to be having this ongoing contact with all the people in her class, and she was basically mechavin to what you just quoted from Shlomo Miller, that she was so confident in her Yiddishkeit, and she was so sure of herself. She had a conversation with people on the first day. You can't tap me on the shoulder when you want to get my attention. I will not go out for drinks with you afterwards. And ultimately, she was voted like most popular and friendly person in the class because they respected her for who she was.
Right.
So
right. 100%. You know, Prince William, I think his name is Prince William. He recently went there to Israel and he lined up to shake all the higher ups in government of the Israeli government. And there's a frum lady that works for the president. I think his name is President Rivlin. And she's a frum lady, and she doesn't shake hands. Did you see the video?
No, I did not.
If you don't look, and someone will point it out to you, you don't even realize what happened. But he's going and shaking everyone's hand, and he comes to her, and she will not shake hands. Like this is already, she's already practiced because she wouldn't shake the queen. She wouldn't shake. I'm not the queen. She wouldn't shake. Trying to remember who else. Like she wouldn't shake higher up hands when it was like almost like scandalous, and you don't even notice. But the Prince William, like he sticks out his hand. She just gives a nod, and that's it. And, like, it's nothing unnatural. He just, like, walks on. He comes like he's not getting her hand, and that's the end of that. And if you won't notice, you won't see it. It's just a natural thing, you know. And the truth is, it's a broader discussion because I get questions a lot of times, not this specifically. Recently, someone who runs HR for a big corporate company, and he's in touch with all these workers and all the employees, and he's almost like the liaison to corporate for these employees, and they have like I think it's a WhatsApp chat. I'm not sure exactly, but they have like a company chat where they schmooze, and he's really close in a certain sense, like he's their guy in the company, and they wanted him to be on the chat. And he said he went on the chat. He said a lot of it's really inappropriate, and he really, from me, doesn't belong on this chat. So then he wants to go off the chat, and he felt uncomfortable going off the chat because now he's putting them down, and now he's saying like I'm better than you, and he got into this little, you know, what do I do? Either way, if I'm going to do what's right la halacha, then I'm going to come off improper, and if I do what's proper for them socially, it's improper la halacha, and it's the same exact thing. Like you can't feel like, you know, the proper thing socially is to do it, but halacha there's no stira. It has to come off that, you know, you have to be proud who you are, and you have to, and a lot of times, you know, it takes a little work. You have to work a little work under the hood where, you know, you have to like bolster yourself up that I'm a little different because I'm part of Klal Yisrael, and we're hailing, and this is the way it is, and it has to have a sense of confidence and purpose, and it has to be practiced, and if it is done right, usually these issues would just go away.
Very good. Okay. Just moving on to Agav. I'm not an expert in technology, but and you're right about the confidence and everything. But probably if a person wanted to get off of a WhatsApp chat without being noticed, you could probably Google how do I get off of a WhatsApp chat without being noticed, and I'm sure there's almost always a way around these things. Another common one that comes up, especially in the summertime, people are in internships, and a lot of times they'll take out the interns to a restaurant.
Right.
So sometimes they'll be nice and they'll bring them to a kosher restaurant. Sometimes not. So first of all, I guess if it's a non-kosher restaurant, can you go? And if you go, can you do anything about it? Did you wear a yarmulke? Can you eat anything? How do you handle saying brachos? And if it's a kosher restaurant, so sometimes it's even worse if it's a kosher restaurant. Because sometimes it brings you to a kosher restaurant with a bad hashgacha. You know, because
right. Good question. So this is another type of question where there's two angles. There's the halacha, because Marasayan in reference to eating food with other people that are not eating the same thing is discussed in Shulchan Aruch, and then there's also the hashkafa. So the truth is, when it comes to Marasayan, for example, in Shulchan Aruch, there's a Marasayan discussed if a person is eating almond milk together with his meat. And so it looks like he's eating milk and meat. So the halacha is you have to make a siman. And the siman is you're supposed to put almonds on the table. So practically, Marashayan, if a person goes to a treifa restaurant and he's not eating the food, which I'm assuming he's not, and he's just going to take an orange or a water, so it's hard to say that it's Marashayan because he's not eating the food there, right? And that's really the truth. But it's kedai to keep in mind the following, that there's so many gedarim and shmiras that Chazal made, for example, Bishal Akum and these type of halachas, where the stated goal of these, right, if a guy cooks food, you're not allowed to eat the food, even though it's kosher food, right? We know that. And the reason why is Gzeir Mishum Chasnas, which means that Chazal they saw the future that if a person's going to be eating and socially eating and together with Gentiles, Chazal was scared it's going to eventually lead to intermarrying. And even though there are ways to kind of circumvent it, because you can eat with them and you're not eating bishul akum, you're eating kosher food, whatever, you'll bring your own food. But it's something that's kedai to keep in mind that it's not something that, it's definitely not something Chazal looks positively at, but a yid and a goy eating together. It's not something that we, people do business and we do business together with goyim, and that's the way it is. But to be eating together with goyim, it's people should try to minimize it as much as possible. It's funny, my father-in-law told me a story, great story. He was telling me, Olympia York, which is the company that Moshe Rachman ran, Rabbi Moshe Rachman, he was nifter. So so eventually it went bankrupt, and there was some lawsuits, and he was completely exonerated. There was nothing he did wrong, but there was a tkufu, and he was being dragged through the courts, and people were beschmutzing him in the courts, and he was telling my shver that a fellow got up in court and he said that Moshe Rachman made this and this promise and he didn't keep it, and therefore there was fraud. So Moshe Rachman told the judge, he looked straight at the judge and he said, I never said such a thing. So the judge said, how could you know you never said it? I mean, you could say you said something else, but you can't know for sure you didn't say it because people can forget it, right? So he said, he looked at the judge, he said, this fellow just said that me and him were having lunch together, and I made this and this promise. He said, I'm in business 40 some odd years. I never, ever did a business lunch with anybody. When I eat, I'm not doing business. I'm eating and I move on. When I do business, I'm in an office. No one ever took me out to eat, and I never took anybody out to eat in all the times I was in business. So if he tells me that I said something while we were doing lunch together, I'm telling you right now, I never said it. Right? And it's a very powerful thing because this is a fellow tremendously successful in business, and believe it or not, he did it without any business lunches, without taking out clients, and people should just know it could be done. And in general, I don't think Chazal look positively at these type of things where you're taking goyim out. For sure, to goyish restaurants, even to Yiddish restaurants, a person should try to keep as much as you can gedarim. You try to stay within his community when you're going to eat out. And when you do business with goyim, you do business with goyim. But to mix those two, I don't think it's something that should be that's lechatchila.
When you learn Machal Yakum, the phrase that keeps coming up is Mishum B'nosehem, because the working assumption was that anyone that you're going to interact with is going to be male to begin with. Nowadays, I would be more concerned. It's not about Mishum B'nosehem, it's them directly interacting. So I think it's an even stronger concern.
Correct. And people, and it's very easy for me and you to sit on the phone, and people have mishanis in their workplace. And sometimes they have pressure; they have to do certain things. First of all, they should know these are mishanis in their business. Nothing's the mikra. If this is a sign that you have that you're going to have to stand firm and not shake the lady's hand and not go out, and you could do it, it's not a mikra that like, oh, I wish I didn't have to do it. This is what Hashem sent you. But ultimately, I'm pretty comfortable saying that a person should try to strive not to eat out with goyim, and when it comes to shaking hands, a person should try to really be stark and be confident and not shake hands, and he'll feel better about it. And a person who does that, you'll grow. You'll grow because you feel better, and you almost internally you're talking, you're growing in yourself, and you're showing how proud you are to be a yid. It's an important thing.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask maybe a question or two about Iver. I'll just tell you two.
Sorry, you broke up. I didn't hear the question. What was it?
Okay, just two questions about Lifnei Iver that came up that people have asked me recently. One case I had, an attorney told me that his boss, the partner that he was working for, this fellow was an associate, and when this frum fellow was going out for lunch one day, the local kosher eatery, the associate, the partner, the boss said, "Oh, on your way back, do me a favor, stop by the place downstairs and pick me up a sandwich or something." He asked for a tuna fish sandwich that wasn't terrible, but the boss was not frum, and the place that he asked him to pick something up from was not a kosher place. Or I had a similar case where a boss said to an employee, "Do me a favor, on your way down or on your way back, get me some sushi. If they have crab, I'd love the crab. If they don't have crab, then." I actually asked Yosef Kushner what he thought about that one. Can you get him the salmon, even if they do have crab, to stop from having to buy him something not kosher? Or I'll give you a third one, just on the topic of pizza. A guy just emailed me today that he's a summer intern, and everyone is chipping in for like a goodbye party for one of the employees, and the food's going to be not kosher. He's allowed to chip in $5, to help pay for the party where they're going to be eating non-kosher food. So I guess that's a lot of questions, but which
a lot of questions. Okay, so it's with these type of questions, it's probably better to discuss the general Halachik guidelines. When a person asks you to bring something to him, so we know there's a Gemara that if a Nazir who's not allowed to drink wine, he asks you to pass him the wine. So it depends on the case. If he can get the wine himself, then Ikra Din, you'll let him give him the wine, right? Because he can get it himself. That's called Charev Dinar, which means it's you and him on the same side of the river. He is able to access the wine. He says, asking for a favor, as a courtesy, pass me the wine. If you don't pass him the wine, he can take the wine. So that's called Charev Dinar. He can access the wine himself. In such a case, there's no Issa Lifnei Iver. So which means practically, if we apply that to today's world, if a guy asks you, do me a favor, go downstairs and buy me crab, we assume, I'm saying he's not physically handicapped where he can't do it himself. We assume he can do it himself. So the Gemara manifesting in the office space would mean there would be no Lifnei Iver. That's really would be the Halacha. There'd be no Lifnei Iver because it's Charev Dinar, you'd be allowed to buy him the crab, technically. That would be Mikra Din Midaraisa, right? And then things start getting a little more complicated because there's Issa Mishayeya. Mishayeya means that you're not allowed to help a Yid. Lifnei Iver means you're not allowed to kind of facilitate it. It's a little more chomer. Mishayeya means you can't even help him. You can't even assist him, which means even if he could get it himself, you still should not assist him, and you can't hand it to him even though he could get it himself. So there's a shayla, what's the halacha by a mummer? Someone who doesn't keep Shabbos openly. So is there an Issa Mishayeya? So the opinion of the Magen Avram and the Mishabura and many others are that there is an Issa, which means that Midrabanan you would not be allowed, in your case, let's say bring the crab, Midrabanan you would not be allowed to do it. Now there is the opinion of the Shach in Yardea, and the Shach says that a mummer you are allowed to. So it's really a machlekes. The Mishabura does not even bring the Shach, and it seems to pass like the Magen Avram. So at the end of the day, we have a machlekes. When it becomes a situation where there's a tremendous loss of money or it's extremely b'diavad, you don't have a way out, there are many poskim. Rav Moshe brings it. I'm not saying Rav Moshe said that a person should l'chatchila be saimach, because I don't think he does, but Rav Moshe brings it, and the Chazanis bring it, and the daily poskim of our generation bring the shach, and they are somewhat comfortable in certain situations being saimach. So there is a way out, which means when there's a person who could do it himself, but he asks you to do it, and you really don't have a way not to do it, and your job's on the line, whatever it is, it's not something that you can easily go around, then you could say there's no Lifnei Iver, and there's also no Mishayeya because the person's not from, right? And this would be Negea literally, if you're sitting in an El Al flight, and you're in the, not El Al, I'm not to serve non-Kosher, but if you're in a Delta flight, and the guy next to you is not from, and the stewardess passed you the food to pass to him, and you're on the aisle seat, can you pass it to him, right? So that would be a shot. I'm assuming he can get it himself. He could lean over you. I don't know if it's Lifnei Iver, but it possibly be a shot of Mishayeya. Are you allowed to do it or not? I would think it's Machlekes Magen Avram and Shach. Mr. Bruce does not seem to go with the shach. Others do go with the shach. So that would be the basic halachic guidelines when it comes to these type of questions. But like I said, many places can forbid it, even by a mummer. So however a person can get out of it, he should. I think that if a person's in an office with a not religious Jew, maybe as an employer, or maybe it's a manager, whatever the case is, if he has a good relationship, I hope he would, maybe he'd be able to have a conversation and say, I'm not judging you. I'm not comfortable doing this because this is something that we look at as forbidden, and I'm not comfortable doing this. If he could do that, that would be great, because then he could just, even when the guy maybe slips and says, could you get me? And says, this is something we spoke about. This is not something I'm comfortable doing. That I think was something he should try to do, and which really goes back to our original conversation where a person should not be embarrassed of his Judaism. A person has to be proud of his Judaism. So that really is the halakhic angle, and that's also the hashkafic angle, that however a person could try to avoid doing that, he should. But when he's dealing with a mummer and the person can get it themselves, then there is a halakhic leeway where it can be done. Now, this is all with the premise that the guy can get it himself. Not always is it like that. Sometimes the person's out of town and the guy says, bring me that and that wine because he's coming from France or whatever it is. And wine is even more common because wines, you really shouldn't be buying wine. Wines is Issurei. I know it's a whole different discussion. But let's just discuss it from a Lifnei Iver standpoint. If he's asking to get you something unique, so then you have Lifnei Iver. You can't do it. Now you could say, well, technically he could fly on a plane and he can get it. He can go to wherever we're talking about. He can go to Merlot in France and buy it himself. But the halacha Lifnei Iver is very clear in the poskim that when it's a tremendous tircha for him or a loss of money, if it would be for him, so then, and he's asking you to do it to avoid that, then there is a Lifnei Iver. So in those cases, the answer has to be a flat out, I'm sorry, I can't do that for you, because that's also deraisa.
Yeah, I was thinking the one about the boss saying, pick me up the crab, and if they don't have crab, then I'll take salmon. I thought that was interesting because that touches on the Chosh and Mishpat, issue also, because he gave money to L'chachila buy himself crab, but if you come back with salmon, he won't complain. So I thought that was an interesting twist.
Meaning you don't really have a trust to buy it, meaning you're saying he's makbid, but you don't have a trust to buy him salmon in the case that there is crab. That's what you say. Right. That's a very interesting question. That is, I have to think about it. It's an interesting question from Alal. Also, you're tricking him. There's still going to have his das going on. You're being mad to him.
Yeah, that's what I think.
And also, I don't know if it's advisable stamazah, because if 20 minutes later he takes a phone call and he goes downstairs and he sees there's crab, then you have some you have some answering to do. It's not usually lying and things like that is not advisable in the workplace.
I think that's a very chashuv point also, that there's a difference between two types of situations, I think. Some situations you have one meeting with a person and that's all it's supposed to be, is a one-time meeting. Other times you're going to be having an ongoing relationship and an ongoing contact with a person. And like you said, when you have a boss or someone that you're going to have ongoing contact with, the conversation could be had once and then that will just, that will be understood going forward. It's sometimes much more challenging when it's just a one-time
thing, yeah. No, it's true. I mean, Reb Moshe has a tshuva in Chelik Dalet Orach Chaim. Maybe it's involved, but it's somewhere around there, something involved, where he discussed a person who's partnering with a fry yid. And he really makes this point, and he really very strongly discourages it. And even saying the word discourage is really not the right word. It's really, it's watering it down by saying discourages it, because he kind of forbids it. And his basic point is that if you're working as a partner with a fry yid, and you think you're going to work things out, you think you're going to work things out for Shabbos and for Yom Tov, whatever it is, and he says it's never, ever going to end. And there's going to be situations where your business is going to compromise halacha. Because of your business, halacha is going to compromise. And then he says it's a chil Hashem. A person's not supposed to partner with a fry yid. It kind of, in a certain sense, validates them as people that you're willing to do business with them, because a person usually picks it. I mean, an employee, a boss or something else, but when you go into business with someone, it's kind of a certain nod to them and their integrity and them as people, you're trusting them, and there's a certain askama in a person that he's my partner. There's something to that, and Moshe writes, a person that has a partner that's a fry yid is an inherent chil Hashem. That's what he says. But that's from a shkafic standpoint. But from a practical standpoint, it's really what we just discussed. That these questions will never end, and there's going to be cases that you're going to be over on halacha. And he says the person should avoid it with all his strength, all his might. A person should avoid having a partner that's a fry yid. Daddy goes through it because he's very sharp about it.
I don't remember the tshuva, but I remember there's another tshuva Moshe has about someone who has a partnership with a non-religious Jew, and they take turns filling the kitchen area of the office. And he wanted to know if it was a problem for the frum Jew to fill the kitchen area with food, with the coffee and everything else, considering that the Shulchan Aruch is clear that you're not allowed to give food to someone who's not going to say a bracha. So
right.
He was makel in that case because you're not really giving food to the person. You're providing, you're putting it out there, and then he's going to come.
Oh, you mean the Ramah? But the Ramah says it's lifnei iver because they don't make a bracha. Yeah. Very interesting.
Right. I think Moshe has a like that. But okay, can I ask you maybe one Shabbos question, just a broad?
Sure.
Yeah. So it's well known that there are certain very, very few frum businesses that do commerce online and shut down the whole website for Shabbos. It's not a very it's a nice kiddush Hashem, but it's not very common. Is there a heter to keep a website going on Shabbos that's going to be doing business for you, 7 days a week?
So Mikra Din, it's funny. There's a heter. Mikra Din is really. It's very hard to ask such a thing. Meaning, Me'ikar Din Halacha is really nothing. There's nothing really to kind of hang your head on and say this is also because, like you said, it's all automated. The Halacha is Shvisas Kalim's mutter, which means that a person has a house running today. Where 200 years ago it didn't look like that, but today the house is running. There's Shvisas Kalim. There's malachas being done for him the whole Shabbos. His lights are going on and off, and his air conditioning is going on, and his fridge is going on, and things are happening. But we paskin shvisas kelim mutter, which means a yid has to rest on Shabbos, but his kelim does not have to rest. His kelim can do things. So, a person sets up a system, and the system is doing malachas for him. Let's say the malachas are havara, turning on the air conditioner or something like that. That's mutter. So when it comes to a website, there's no malachas. Usually the malachas would maybe things. The only thing that's happening would be makach memker. When they came out with the invention of when it became popular, the vending machine, so the Mashag wrote a tshuva, and it's good that he goes through it, but he comes out very clear that it's mutter, and that's how it's genommen in Klal Yisrael. I don't know, maybe then there were maybe some cholkin, but it became ungenommen and accepted that a yid's allowed to own a vending machine. And a vending machine, let's say a soda machine, is much more extreme than a website because there's actually commerce happening, which means you're getting money and he's getting a product. Where on a website, no one's getting anything. He is not receiving money. Maybe there's a credit card transaction hold happening, but he doesn't actually receive money. And the buyer doesn't actually get a product, which means between me and you, there's no kinyan. There's maybe a chayvus on both ends, but it's much less than a soda machine. So, Me'ikar Adin, I wrote a tshuva in Commerce and Shabbos, and I showed it to my shver. I wanted him to make sure he because I spoke to him and I wanted to make sure he agreed everything I wrote. So I showed him this tshuva, and I wrote that it's mutter, and that's my father-in-law's opinion that it is mutter, and more that it's not a heter, it's really mutter. It's really, and he said it's mutter, and then after he told me, he said it's very important people to know the following that. And this is a very important point because I want people to know this about these people that do clothes like B&H. When you go through the halachas of, let's say, whatever it is, let's say bayra, right? Let's just take an example. You're allowed to take the good from the bad, right? This is a mefurish in halacha. You're not allowed to take the bad from the good in Hilchos Shabbos, right? So you're separating things, and you're allowed to take the good from the bad. Nowhere does it say that if you're allowed to take the good from the bad, but if you don't, then it's hashrecha, then it's meradik, it's covered Shabbos. But when it comes to the halachas of work being done for you on Shabbos, this is the Gemara in the Chaf Aleph and Kuf Nun, this common Gemaras, and they're almost the same story, but just different people. The Gemara says that you're not, if there's a fire in your field, there's certain things you're allowed to do, right? When all your nechasim are being burned up. So you're not allowed to do Amir Lakim. You can't say to someone, put it out, but you could say, whoever puts it out won't lose, which is like a remez that if they do it, they'll be paid back, right? But the Gemara says, even though you're allowed to do that, Ma'aseh b'chasad echad, who did not do that, he did not let anyone put the fire out, and the Gemara says that he had a tremendous Yeshua, and from there he was able to, there's a few such Gemaras, and the Gemara says, why is it a murdic thing what he did? He's allowed to let the guy put it out. The Gemara says, between Kavod Shabbos. And there's another Gemara in Kufran Aleph, very similar Gemara like that. Also, a person was extra medactic that nothing should be done in his field. And then the Gemara says a certain tree grew. The name of the tree is, that tree that we find at Chazakas and Babasra, it grows threefold. Whatever it is, the Gemara says that he had tremendous bracha from Parnasa from the fact that he didn't do it. So the Gemara is very clear that whatever a person will do to minimize work, like finance, economic work, commercial work, and done in his nechasim, on his rishos, or whatever it is, it's a murdic thing because it's Kavod Shabbos. It's an open statement of Kavod Shabbos. So even and Mashver made me write that after that people should know that if you close your website, don't think you're a chassid shaita. If you want to be makbid and not take the good from the bad and Hilchos Bayra, lav dafka, you're doing a murdic thing. But if you shut your website, it's Kavod Shabbos. It's an open explanation, open statement to the world how you believe that everything comes from the Eibishter, and on Shabbos everything shuts down because it's the Eibishter's world, and the world is we're Shabbos, we rest, and it's a tremendous Kavod Shabbos. So that's really the short and the long of the answer. Ikra din, it's mutter. The person does that, it's tremendous Kiddush Hashem.
That makes a lot of sense. Just one.
People tell me I'm sorry.
Yeah, just one ha'ara that sometimes when having a website going is not only having a website going. A lot of times people won't say it when they're asking the shayla, but it also means having an employee to troubleshoot in case, someone...
it's funny. I'll tell you, it's funny because, like, this is something I thought, like, I wanted to address when I wrote my sefer, people have websites open, but between me and you, having a website open is not much of a shayla. But any guy in real estate, come on, any guy that has, if he has one unit, not, but if he has units, multi-units, he usually has a super, and very negay, usually a super is working on Shabbos. And between me and you, real estate, or culture care, nursing homes, or other industries, it's much more negay having issues with people working on Shabbos than an e-commerce website, because usually an e-commerce website on Shabbos is closed because there's no shipping. And usually, and maybe sometimes there are busy times and he has to catch up, but generally speaking, everything closes down on Shabbos. That's my exposure to these type of companies is on Shabbos, everything is closed. But real estate's not like that. So the truth is that where people think that this is, a very troublesome industry, it's not such a troublesome industry, but you look at real estate and other industries, and they have much bigger nisanis sometimes when it comes to Shabbos.
Nursing homes, hotels, everything.
Nursing homes and hotels, I guess people know that because those are by nature, they can't close. But when you think of, let's say, just a guy who has real estate, you don't think of it as a term that this is a challenge for Shabbos. But ultimately it is, because you have tenants that sometimes need to be serviced on Shabbos because things come up, things happen, especially if you have, you have a mass of units and someone has to be available when the heating goes down on Shabbos and it's cold, or the air conditioning goes down in the sun, someone has to be available. And that guy's usually an employee of the owner. And now you have a very textbook shayla of Amir Akma, someone who's working for a year, doing work for Malacha on behalf of the owner, and you have serious issues. So.
Okay. I thank you very much, Rabbi Kushner. It was a fascinating conversation, and thank you very much for your time and for your expertise.
Fine. My pleasure. Likewise. Okay, thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Okay, take care. We welcome to the program Dr. Giela Gellis, who's an optometrist living in Cleveland with her husband and 4 children, Kanai Nahara. And Dr. Gellis is going to provide us with a woman's perspective of having to earn a living and a woman being in the workplace and going through schooling and the unique challenges that come with that. Welcome, Dr. Gellis.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's a great pleasure. We look forward to hearing about your experiences. Maybe if you could just give us a little bit of background as to your schooling, where you're from, and what your experiences were like in school and getting your first job.
So I grew up in Riverdale, New York, and knew my entire life that I wanted to do something in medicine. And thankfully was part of a joint degree program between Stern College, which is part of Yeshiva University, and SUNY Optometry, which is the only optometry school in New York. So I felt very fortunate to be accepted into that program and began optometry school. And it was really my first experience being in a school environment that was not a frum environment. So it certainly came along with quite a bit of challenge in terms of navigating a school environment which was not necessarily reconcilable with my Orthodox lifestyle. However, it was really incredible to be part of a student body. We all were very similar in certain ways. We were all very focused and driven and ambitious, but at the same time, there were certain issues that came up which were certainly challenging. So, some of those were, there was a lot of socializing after school, which I certainly did not want to partake in. In terms of having male students in my class that were not familiar with Shomer Negia or any of the issues that, that we are sensitive to, I really had to explain from the get-go that I was not comfortable at all with them tapping me on the shoulder or anything like that. I remember one particular conversation where some students were really perturbed as to why I would never date or marry somebody who was not Jewish. And I was actually very thrilled with how the conversation went, because at first they were very upset about this concept. They really couldn't understand where I was coming from, but by the end, they really recognized that every part of my life really had something to do with my values as a Orthodox Jewish woman, and that wasn't something that I would change in any way, and it was something that I was very proud of. And by the end of school, I really realized that, I'd formed wonderful relationships with these people. So it was the challenge of creating boundaries on the one hand, but at the same time maintaining a warm relationship that showed people that Orthodox Jews certainly are, on the one hand, very much like them, and on the other hand, still maintain their value system.
It sounds like you really felt like you had to represent Orthodox Judaism to people who weren't so exposed to Orthodox Jews before. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely. And there were a lot of students in my class who had never, ever even spoken to an Orthodox Jew. There were people who had come from all over. Certainly, as I mentioned, it's the only optometry school in New York, and there aren't many in the country overall. So people definitely were coming from other cities or places where they had never spoken to an Orthodox Jew. And that really put in a huge sense of responsibility on me, in the sense that everything I said, everything I did was a representation not only of myself, but of all of Klal Yisrael, of all Orthodox Jews. And if I could give them a positive image, make them realize that I certainly was somebody they could relate to, that would certainly change their entire view of all Orthodox Jews. So it was really an opportunity to create a Kiddush Hashem, and it was something that I took very seriously.
Is it something that you were prepared for? Meaning, coming out of seminary and Stern College, did you go in knowing that you obviously knew you were going to be around people who were not all from women like you always had been, but did you go in knowing that you were going to be such a spokesperson and the kind of interactions you were going to have? Were you prepared for that?
On the one hand, I feel like I've had great role models in my life who, have gone out in the world and, were always very proud of their Judaism and proud to represent that. But in terms of the very specific situations that I was encountering, I really didn't feel that they were things that had ever been discussed in any seminary, in any of my schooling, in high school or in college, going to Stern. The situations that I was in were certainly nothing that had ever been discussed or that I felt properly prepared for. I have to say I felt like I navigated them as well as I possibly could have. But I did find it interesting that so many of these real life experiences were things that really had never been, taught or discussed. One particular situation that came up once I was working, I had a patient of mine who actually asked me what religion I was, which obviously was a little inappropriate, I thought, or just an interesting question for a patient to ask their doctor. But of course, I proudly answered that I was Jewish, and she went on to tell me that she was Christian and really tried to almost convert me. Was very disturbed by the fact that I, felt so reluctant to accept her views. Of course, I was having a polite conversation with her, and I certainly wasn't going to have a debate. It wasn't the appropriate setting for that. But she continued to come back to my office repeatedly, first with a Bible and then, telling me all sorts of things of how, well, Jesus might come and, Dr. Gellis, I don't want you to be left out and I'm worried about you. And she was so passionate about her religion and so passionate about trying to really impress these ideas upon me that it really did spark something, because I felt like, look at this woman. She's so unabashedly willing to proclaim her, her belief system. And although she's doing it in an inappropriate way, she's so passionate about it. If only we had that little spark in us to be so passionate or unashamed to let other people know that we are proud of our heritage and our belief system. But in addition, in terms of not being prepared, I really did find that although I didn't want to debate her, I certainly would not have been able to in the way that I would have wanted to. And it inspired me to then go on and read some more and learn some more about the differences between Judaism and other religions. And it really, really inspired my level of emunah and really opened up a whole awareness for me about some very basic ideas that, once again, had never really been taught to me in any yeshiva or seminary environment.
Should teach skills in debating. I mean, this sounds like missionary. Is that something that yeshivas and seminaries need to be teaching because people are going to be out there in the workplace, or is this more of a unique one-off kind of situation?
I think the situation was definitely unique, and obviously in all my years of working, I've been working for 16 years already. It was definitely a unique situation and only a one-time occurrence. But what I did find was that the overall feeling that I think people find challenging about being in a secular environment when they have grown up in a frum environment and only gone to school in a frum environment is that some people feel nervous about, well, are the beliefs that I will hear outside or the type of lifestyle that I see, will it challenge my own beliefs? Will it take away from my observance, from my emunah, from my passion for Judaism? I certainly have found it to be just the opposite. But I think that it would be important for yeshivas to impress upon students who will go out into the secular workforce just how proud they should be of our Yiddishkeit and our culture and our value system and our Torah, because I don't think we're hearing that enough in school. So even though maybe specifically, the situation may never come up that you need to debate somebody who's a missionary, I think for me, when I started reading just about how much we can realize how unique our Torah is and how so many of the things in Yiddishkeit are so special, it can really enhance your emunah and enhance your confidence in going out into the world.
I wanted to ask, I'm sure there are, I don't know like the specifics of shilos that can come up in optometry, but you mentioned a few issues that could come up in optometry school. How important is it to have first a Rav and also a role model, and are those the same? Meaning, is it important for a woman to have a female role model, advisor, mentor, something like that? And is it important to have Rav to ask whatever questions might come up. Have you found that that's, I know every business is different. So optometry, I don't know, but how does that affect, or how important do you think that is in life?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important to have role models. Somebody that comes to mind for me as a female role model is my Babi, Allah Shalom. She was such a huge figure in my life, and thankfully my daughter is named for her, Mira. And she grew up in a time when women were not able to, pursue their passions and or in quite the same way that she would have liked. She was an incredibly religious person. Whenever I walked into her apartment, she was always davening and always learning, always had a chumash in her hand. But at the same time, really, really got tremendous nachas from women who did incredible things and were smart and driven and empowered. And I think of the juxtaposition of those two ideas as being a deeply frum person with tremendous emunah, but who also feels very proud to do things and work in a high level. And I think, in terms of your question of asking other people, specifics, I wouldn't say that comes up very often for me. I think it's more of the ideal of recognizing that you can be this amazing role model to other people, as we discussed, of being somebody who is perceived by other people as being, a Yirei Shamayim, and somebody who works incredibly hard at growing and learning and becoming a better Jew all the time, and at the same time is doing exceptional work in whatever capacity in their workforce. So I think of my Bobby, and I think of how proud she is. I know she attended my graduation at the age of 100, and I saw the nachas that she got from being able to see me accomplish that goal. And at the same time, it wasn't seen as something that would take away in any part from my Yiddishkeit and from my observance level.
Did you find, just going back to your schooling, did you find that when you had to explain tznius-related issues, you're not comfortable being tapped on the shoulder, that kind of thing, that people were respectful, resentful, a little bit of each, confused?
I think if you present yourself as a friendly person and a warm person, then you can explain those somewhat uncomfortable things to people, and they will take it quite well. So I had a wonderful relationship with the people in my class, and I felt that it was very important to explain certain things from the get-go, because if you don't, for example, explain that you can't just tap me on the shoulder, I'm not comfortable with that, and you explain why from the beginning, then you've now, created a situation where for the next 4 years, you probably won't need to explain that again. And I did find that my classmates were very open to it. They were quite curious about my lifestyle, but they knew that they could always ask me absolutely anything, and I was never uncomfortable by their questions either. So, I remember after my first year of optometry school, they announced they were having an award for the most patient-friendly student in the class, and I actually received the award. And the reason why it was so meaningful to me, aside from the obvious, was that I was thinking, wow, here I am. I'm putting myself out there as an Orthodox Jew. I don't socialize with my classmates afterwards. I don't go out drinking with them. I dress differently. I leave early on Fridays. There's so many things that are separating me from them, but at the same time, they're perceiving me as somebody that they admire, somebody who treats their patients well, somebody who is a friendly, warm person. So to me, that was just the ultimate the ultimate Kiddush Hashem that I could do, that I could make. And so again, overall, I think when you have these tricky conversations with people, if you have a warm relationship with them, I think it's a good place to start, and it makes them more eager to have the dialogue with you as opposed to seeing you as an outsider.
It sounds like you are presenting a very positive image of how one can really be successful in a secular environment by being proud of their Yiddishkeit, not being ashamed, and just being not being a nice person to make a Kiddush Hashem, but being a nice person, but for being a nice person's sake, and then you end up making a Kiddush Hashem. It sounds like a really wonderful model to follow. I just wanted to maybe close with one more question. If you were able to go back to, let's say they invited you to speak in Stern College to the undergraduates, or you were able to have a conversation with yourself when you were at that stage in life, are there certain things that you wish you would have known, or that you think young women should know as they enter the workforce that you haven't yet covered in your previous answers?
I think my message to them would be, don't be scared to go out into the secular workforce. There's so many reasons why, as a frum Jew, you should just embrace this opportunity. It is a wonderful, wonderful environment to be a Kiddush Hashem. It's a wonderful opportunity to recognize that you can be the spiritual foundation of your home, but you can also still feel fulfilled professionally by working outside of it. And again, I think the opportunities to show other people that Orthodox Jews are people who can relate to them, who perhaps have more things in common with them than they may have already thought, debunk some of those misconceptions. I had one situation at work, and I would certainly share this story with Stern College students just to explain the impression that they can make. Years ago, I was starting a new job, and somebody in the industry, not an optometrist, but somebody who had worked in the field, told me, "Oh, you better be careful when you go to work there. There's a gentleman who absolutely hates Orthodox Jews. He's had an awful experience with somebody, and don't even mention you're Orthodox because it's just not going to work out well for you." So I was, a little, I wouldn't say concerned. I would say more open to the challenge, but, a little cautious, going into this environment. And over the years, I really was able to gain this person's respect and trust and, show that I did a good job. And over the years, we started speaking more, and I saw a complete 180 transformation from somebody who absolutely hated Orthodox Jews to someone who at one point actually said to me, "You've really shown me that Orthodox Jews are normal." And I think the biggest message I would give all students is that one person can have such a negative influence on somebody in terms of what Orthodox Jews are like. But one person can also have the most inspiring, positive impression on somebody. And you can be that one person. So don't underestimate the influence that you can have. Don't underestimate that by somebody perceiving you in a positive way, it's really a light and the Kiddush Hashem for everybody.
Sounds like a wonderful message. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Gellis. I really appreciate your time. It's been wonderful having you on the show. And you should have continued atzlach and making a Kiddush Hashem wherever you go.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.